Okay. Good morning, all. And we're just going to now start off our session. So firstly, I'd like to welcome you all to TCBC and on behalf of the Dementia team. Carers Week is this week. It's a national thing, observed, and it's highlighting the importance of unpaid carers. And I actually went to the website today, this week, just to look at what it had to say. And it says, carers provide unpaid support and care to family members, friends and persons in the community, and does not include disability support workers, aged care workers, or other paid carers. It's estimated that there are 235,000 young Australians aged between 12 to 25 who are in unpaid caring role for family and friends, which is pretty amazing. So it's a significant thing in all communities. So we're delighted to be able to resume this activity, such as it is. This is our third forum, and we've had a gap for 2 years due to COVID. So we're really pleased that we can recommence this and that you're with us. So, as introductions, I'm Dave, I'm your MC, and I'd like to introduce you to the Dementia team. And if you look around, you'll see the folk with the red T-shirts. So if you have any questions or have a need, just grab one of the red T-shirted people and they'll be there to help you. They have cards and information. So, an outline for today. So we've got a professional carer here to talk. We've got an unpaid carer here to talk. There's going to be a session on dementia and faith, a Q&A session, and I'm going to talk about our support ministry called Around the Table, and that will be later in the presentation. So, housekeeping, if you need to go to the bathroom, just on the other side of the kitchen. And if we ever have a fire, don't panic. We've got exits on either end of the auditorium. So I think we're all kind of like getting ready to go. And the last thing is there's some information packs sitting around your seat, so grab them. Because we don't actually register attendance and we're trying to keep an eye on our environmental impact, we've only printed so many, but that doesn't mean people who don't get them can't get one. So if you can't find one, grab one of the red T-shirt people and ask them to give you a card, and you fill the card in and we'll send you a pack. And it will include stuff like from Dementia Australia, which is really quite important. Okay, so let's kick off, and please join me to welcome Sharon Strahan, and she comes to the podium. Sharon, as an introduction, is a clinical nurse consultant specialising in aged care and dementia. 40 years of nursing experience. Wow. And current role includes in-home support. So over to Sharon.
Thank you. Lovely to see you all, and hello to everybody who's viewing online. I'm a bit of a pacer, so I'm really glad I've got this headset on and I'm not tied to the microphone, because I do tend to wander around a bit when I'm talking. I hope that's not going to be too distracting for people. Bit of nervous energy, you know. So dementia. Look, I've kind of done this split it up into 3 sections, but we may end up smudging it along a little bit. I just wanted to do what happens next. We've just found out that somebody that we know has this dementia diagnosis. But I also wanted to talk to you about the physical comorbidities of dementia, and what that means is the bunch of things that go with it that you're probably not expecting or aren't aware of. So I'm going to go through them, but if you don't take it all in, it's fine, because there are little brochures up on the back table that actually summarise that for carers. Actually, it's a carers edition, that's right, yes. So they're on the back table. I've put a bunch of other stuff on the back table as well, just in case there's anything there that you guys might find useful. So we'll go in. And the last part that I'm going to talk about, and I think I need to get to that a little bit more quickly, is the whole behaviours, communication style. Why does this happen? Part of the talk. And my experience tells me that that might be the bit that you might end up being a bit more interested in. So if it does look like I'm pushing through the comorbidities bit, it's because I know that that bit at the end is the stuff that I get asked all the time when I go out in the community. So my colleagues, my geriatricians, see the way they're mine, who know me, they refer to Sydney Home Nursing for me to go out and see their patients in the community, and the field nurses are the same, because somebody is looking after somebody with dementia and they're struggling with behaviours or how to deliver care. And so I often go out and do that kind of talk. So that's how I know that when we get to that bit, I think it's the stuff that you're probably going to want to know more than anything else. So, dementia. Not only is my short-term memory horrible, but so is my short-term memory. And that's how fast it can be sometimes, unfortunately. Okay, so what is dementia? So I'm just going to, this is just 2 slides on this. I'm not going to bombard you with this. It's progressive, it's irreversible, and it's a syndrome. So it's an overarching term to describe impaired memory, intellectual function, change in personality, perhaps further on, behaviours, and all of that causing a significant impairment in function. So in other words, interrupting day-to-day life for that person. There are many different types of dementia, about 100. So as I said, it's an overarching term. So mostly what we tend to see is Alzheimer's, vascular, some mixed, Lewy bodies. There are so many. I got to tell you though, they start out perhaps a bit differently, but really at the end of the day, as the disease progresses along, there's an awful lot of features that are the same. So I wouldn't get too tied up with what exactly it is. So we've got a new diagnosis. So what's next? Don't panic. Don't panic. There is help out there for you and for the person living with dementia. And some of that help, there are resources available. So we've got Dementia Australia. You probably can't see that very well, but Dementia Australia is a huge resource out there. It used to be called Alzheimer's Australia, if you might remember. Dementia Support Australia is a little bit different. That's sort of more the behavioural stuff that's more Hammond care. The Carer Gateway is another place to go. Now, the Carer Gateway is really important. It's important because if you register with the Carer Gateway, you can actually unlock up to $3,000 worth of in-home flexible respite hours on top of anything else you might be getting. So it's a really useful place to go, and they can help you with a lot of stuff. The first 2 have got 24-hour helplines as well. Most GP practices now have access to social workers to work in the community as well, so that don't be afraid to ask your GP for that, to have some help with that as well, because otherwise a lot of us only make contact with social workers when either us or our loved ones go into hospital. But they recognise there was a bit of a gap in the community, so you can ask your GP for some help from a social worker in the community. And clinical trials, which might seem like an odd thing to be putting up there as a resource. The clinical trials obviously are being held to try and find a cure or a way of slowing down, but really if you get into a clinical trial, you're getting support from geriatrician and nurses and information and support from that, so that can be quite helpful. So that's the basic stuff out there in terms of resources. But what I would say is it's always worth considering some future proofing. Once you've got that diagnosis, or once the dust has settled and you need to start thinking about moving forward, there are certain things that I would really promote. And one is enduring guardianship, while that person still has the capacity to do it, and enduring power of attorney. So we need to protect their interests in terms of somebody to make health and lifestyle choices for them, and somebody who's going to be able to manage their finances. Doesn't have to be done for everybody, but it's definitely something to consider. Get onto My Aged Care, the website, register that person, register yourself as their representative. Once you get on there, that's where you're going to get all your services is going to be channeled through My Aged Care. So if you've never had any contact with My Aged Care before, then consider going onto that website and getting registered. Now, the other thing can be a little bit contentious as well. I suggest that if the person allows it, that you let close family and friends know, because it really helps to lower expectations a little bit and allow people to understand the changes that might be happening. And I do see that the people who can talk about it, the person who has dementia, if they can talk about it, it does make life a lot easier for the carers and the people around them as well. And if people have a bit of an understanding of what's going on, there's not so much, the expectations are just lower. So therefore, there's not as much stress on that person. That makes sense. Two other things that are worth considering is advanced care directives. The person still needs to have capacity to do that, or it's something that you guys can be thinking about doing for yourselves. A lot of people do advanced care directives when they're very, very well. And the directive is actually signed by the person, and it's done with a doctor. And then that can then go into the electronic medical record when they go into the public hospital setting. The other thing is planning. Advanced care planning isn't so formalized, but it's about sitting down and having that conversation with people, with your family, for yourself, for the person who has dementia. What do we want things to look like as the disease progresses? And this is stuff around how much do you want in the way of intervention? What is end of life going to look like? You may not go into detail. A lot of you have probably already had conversations like this. I know I have. But it is something to think about because you're going to want to know as time goes on that that person's wishes are being respected. The other two are probably a little bit obvious, but I would suggest leaving employment if that person's still employed, or leaving or scaling back volunteer work, because those two things add stress. And generally, we really want to start taking stress off a little bit. And the last thing, of course, is the getting affairs in order things. So being prepared and planning wills, testaments, all that kind of stuff, what's going to happen next. So it's all a little bit, I've got to go through all this, but it's just something to consider, and I call it future-proofing. Okay, what we want to avoid. What do we want to avoid? We want to avoid taking over, It's very easy to start taking over. So there will be things that will need to be handed over, but not everything and not all at once. So I see this a lot when I go out to homes where family members with the best of intentions have started to do everything for that person. Sometimes it's a matter of expediency, it's quicker, it's done better, whatever, but you don't necessarily have to take over everything. Avoid having high expectations. You don't really think you've got high expectations until they fall short, and you think, I was expecting a bit much there. It's absolutely exhausting having dementia, and it's hard having dementia, and it gets harder. So we really need to bring our expectations really down and go, anything that we are able to do is a bonus, and we're not to expect. The trouble is, of course, we all have default relationship standpoints and roles, and we all tend to speak and do things in the way that we always have. And that can bring its own problems because we have to learn that we can't necessarily do that anymore. So that's something I will talk about a little bit more further on. Avoid withdrawing from friends and groups. Really keep the social connections for as long as that person is able to cope, and then find ways of continuing them for your own respite and sake. And this does tend to happen. What happens is people start to withdraw mostly for the person who has the dementia. It's because they find being in a group starting to get stressful, or a big group is overstimulating. That's fine. At the point where that's no longer of benefit to that person, definitely wind that back. But you need to keep them going. As carers, you need to keep them going. And I see people who have kind of withdrawn into that space, that same space as the person who has the dementia, and they don't get out and they don't get to see anybody. And all of that social support and connection sort of fizzles away a little bit. And it's not because other people aren't offering, it's because that person keeps saying no. It's really important to keep it up if you possibly can. Avoid pushing them to stimulate their brain. I've had a lot of this as well. Well, I've got all these puzzles for them to do. I think they should be doing stuff. Don't you think they should be doing stuff? Don't you think they could be, I think they need to be doing this and they need to be doing that. Or maybe what I thought they could do, I thought we could take them off to an art class and they could learn how to. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because you know what? They probably won't achieve any of what you're expecting them to do. It's going to add stress to them and to yourselves, and it won't stop the disease. The time to stimulate your brain is way before that. We need to stimulate our brains, but you don't ask someone who has dementia to try and stimulate their brain. Keep them interested in stuff they're interested in, yes, but don't start pushing them to do something that they wouldn't have otherwise done. Does that make sense? Okay. The other thing is it's time to look at the home environment. We need a supportive and safe home environment. I'm going to whip through these things because most of you have probably already figured it out. But look at stuff like the bathroom. Is the hob very high to step over? Do we have a hose rather than a rose? Because that's what we really want. Have we got handrails? Do we have shower chairs or stools? We don't have to have all this at once, by the way. It's just something to start thinking along the lines of, and I'll tell you why later. A contrasting toilet seat can be useful. Start thinking about handrails to steps and staircases. Think about floor safety, looking at loose rugs and glary surfaces, trip points between rooms. There was somebody was at somebody's house the other day, and as you came up the stairs, or as you came along the landing to go down the stairs, there was a raised bead, like a joining bead. And I don't have dementia, although, you know, occasionally you might wonder. But I definitely came to that bead and thought, my foot nearly caught on that, and I could have just gone down. Now, that's fine. I could have recovered. I like to think so anyway. But somebody with dementia might. So anywhere where you've got trip points, that's the kind of stuff we need to look at. Pebblecrete, shiny floor tiles. Just start looking at all of this stuff. Lighting. So we want bright lights over risky areas like stairs, the bathroom, kitchen. But we also want night lights for wayfinding to the bathroom, to the toilet. Ensure smoke alarms are fitted. It's amazing how many people don't have them, and older people who have perhaps never had them, and now maybe they have dementia, they're not in a position to do it, so the fire service will come out and do it. We had to break into somebody's house the other day, and not me, obviously, I wasn't the one breaking in, but they couldn't raise him, and he was fine. But when the fire service got in there and they took a look around and went, holy smokes, this lot could go up in an instant, where the fire smoke detectors, they weren't there. So they fitted the house out with smoke detectors. So it's just something to think about. Make sure that utilities, rent, mortgage payments, all of that are set up. It's astonishing how many houses we go into and there are, 3 unpaid electricity bills, and nobody's quite cottoned on that they're not doing that so well anymore. So make sure that that stuff is done so that's safe from that point of view. Keep an eye on their medications. That's something that goes very quickly. To be fair, it is a bit like Groundhog Day, isn't it? Taking your medications. Like, did I take my medications? Well, I must have, because you can picture yourself doing it, because you do it every day. So therefore, it must have just happened this morning. So then you find packets lying around and tablets on the floor, and you kind of go, you know what, I just don't think this is quite happening the way I think it is. So just watching for that kind of thing as well. Because you can get blister packs, you can do dose set boxes, you can do stuff to help, but if you haven't spotted it, then you can't do it. And also keep an eye on the contents of the fridge. Anyone who's looking after somebody but not sharing the same home as them, oh my goodness, the 2 places I go and look, every house I go into, can I look at your bathroom? Can I look in your fridge? Yes, fridges, that's very interesting. If you can look in someone's fridge and you see stuff in there that's like 3 weeks out of date, it's like, that's a real red flag. So you need to make sure that the fridge is safe. No. Okay. So the other thing we need to do is support and promote their abilities. So we're encouraging them to do what they've always done if they're still able to do it, and we don't worry about it if it's not at the same standard as it used to. I mean, if you've got someone who's always vacuumed and they're still vacuuming, it's like, hurrah. We don't worry if it's not getting under the table or under the chairs. Just keep going with whatever they can do to whatever standard they're at. It's not worried about it's just about keeping those abilities. Partly down to that, not taking over everything, And assist and supervise if needed. So if they've always done the cooking and you're noticing things are starting to drop out of that recipe, just be around in the kitchen. Just be there to support it or dial things down a bit, but promote that they can do as much as they can for themselves, because it's very tempting to start taking things off, and it helps them to keep maintaining function. Exercise or walking daily is very good. If you can ever manage to do that, if you've got someone in the family who can do that, if you can get people out for a walk every day, it's amazing how much that helps. As I said, nothing's going to stop it, but we're doing anything that's going to help here. So exercise is good. Professor Sue Curl will always say, if I could put 2 hours of exercise into a pill and hand that out to put 2 hours of exercise a week into a pill and hand that out to everybody, that's what I would do. So it's quite interesting, actually, because I will come back to this story from a different angle, but having been at Hornsby and done the rater for the clinical trials, you get to talk to people who are still early in their dementia, who can still tell you stuff. And this one man was in his late 60s, and he was a bit of a runner. And he said his mind was at its most clear after he'd been for a run. So it's really helpful. And also we need to keep the emotional equilibrium as far as possible. It helps the person, but it also helps the one who's caring for them. And I'm going to get into that in the later part of the talk, because that's very important. And then there's you. So we need to take care of you, especially if you're the main carer. If you become overwhelmed, the person you're caring for will be overwhelmed. It's as simple as that. Carer groups, online, face-to-face, this is a very good example. Respite, using respite, cottage respite, where you only have just a few nights. Residential or in-home respite, when someone comes into the house, you need time for you. You need time to breathe and be yourself. You need time for good conversation and emotional support. You need time to recharge your batteries. You need time for your own interests. And I do applaud the people who say, I'm still going out on a Wednesday afternoon to play bowls. Great, just keep this stuff going if you possibly can. and you need time for you. And don't neglect your own physical or mental health or medical appointments. And I see this quite a lot too. It's like when you're on the aeroplane, right? And they say, put your own oxygen mask on before attempting to help others. And that really does apply. I've seen people put off having to have surgery. I've had people put off following up with appointments, put off having their eyes checked, put off because they don't see themselves as being the important person in the equation. This can wait, I'll find another time. But you have to look after yourself. It's really, really important. Talk to family and friends. Do a little bit of venting from time to time. It's okay. It's okay to be really angry and frustrated and totally nicked off with the whole thing. But it's really helpful to get that out to someone who doesn't care that you're saying it, doesn't judge you for saying it. It helps a lot with stress levels. And also reach out to health professionals if things are getting really tough. That's people like your GP, that's geriatricians, it's people like me and nurses. You don't have to go it alone. You can get some extra input and support and advice from people. Now, I've just popped this up here. This is an inspirational speaker. I know for certain that we never lose the people we love, even to death. They continue to participate in every act, thought, and decision we make. Their love leaves an indelible imprint in our memories. We find comfort in knowing that our lives have been enriched by having shared their love. The problem with dementia is that it's a bit of a long goodbye, and we do tend to lose people by degrees. So this, I think, is really sort of sums up that person is always there in your heart. So I'm going to kind of do a little bit of questions as we go, because there's a lot of stuff here and you might not remember at the end of it all. So has anybody got any questions on this first little bit? Because if not, I'll move on, and you can talk to me at tea time, but if there are any questions right now, that's fine. Oh, okay. We will move on. I've got to keep an eye on the time. I've got about another 7 minutes before we break. So, let's get into this lots of information bit and sort of condense it down as much as we can so that we can get on to the other thing, the stuff that I think you all really want to know. So it's very interesting to know that there is a bunch of stuff that's associated with dementia that people don't necessarily see coming and aren't necessarily aware of. So a physical comorbidity is a disease or a condition that coexists with another disease. They're often, perhaps it wouldn't be there if it wasn't for that other disease. And these are the ones that occur more commonly with anyone who has a diagnosis of dementia. So how this was started off is that Sue Curl, Professor Sue Curl, anybody see the aged care home for 4-year-olds? Yes, so she was one of the talking heads on that, yeah. So Professor Sue Curl, Professor Brodati, and Roseanne Hogarth, they did a literature review, and they looked at nearly 4,000 articles. We're talking research articles. And out of all of those articles, they came up with 9 comorbidities to review. So I'm going to whip through them. So they are falls, epilepsy, delirium, frailty, malnutrition, oral disease, visual impairment, sleep disorders, and incontinence. And the little handbook that you've got is the consumer edition of the actual book that was published. So grab one at the back. So epilepsy. Interesting. Most people don't have a clue that epilepsy is a physical comorbidity of dementia. It's not huge numbers. But just to define it, it's a brief, unprovoked disturbance of consciousness, behavior, motor function, or sensation. It does happen a bit more commonly in older people, but then people with dementia get it even more commonly than that. So if someone has Alzheimer's, they have a fold increased risk of having a seizure or fit. Seizures may occur in up to 25% of people who have Alzheimer's disease. People with vascular dementia have a 4-fold increased risk of having a seizure. And vascular dementia is often seen following a stroke or because of the impact on the blood flow in the brain. Between 5 and 10% of people with dementia are likely to have a seizure at some point. And so we consider a seizure if that person is falling from no apparent reason, or if they fainting, or if they have moments of unresponsive. Now, a lot of people are going to think it's a TIA. Have you heard that expression, mini stroke? But in the absence of any evidence to support that, it's certainly worth thinking that we might actually be seeing seizures. And I had a nurse on the ward said to me, "Do you know," she said, "you did that talk, and this patient the other day, there was just sitting there on the side of bed and just went completely blank, and then before I could do anything had fallen off the bed." She said, and I said, "Sounds like a seizure." She said, "Yeah, that's what I thought," because there was no evidence to support TIA. They'd already been down that road, but she'd actually seen it happening in front of her. They are very difficult to detect. It's very hard to really diagnose seizures, especially in someone with dementia, because they're not going to lie still for an EEG and all of that kind of stuff. But again, Professor Sue Kerr will always say, "Do you know what? You can start an anticonvulsant medication. It's not going to do them any harm. And if it doesn't change anything, then it's not a seizure. But if they never have it again, then you know you're treating a seizure." So it's just something to think about. I don't want you to rush home and be worrying every time somebody gazes off into space, but it's just something to think about. It's a comorbidity. Now, delirium. Have people been hearing the word delirium? So I'm only going to do this slide and then I'm going to break. But delirium is an acute confusion. Comes on really suddenly. It's a rapid onset, it's an altered level of consciousness, and it disturbs their attention, orientation, memory, thinking, perception, behaviors. It all sounds very much like dementia, doesn't it? People living with dementia have a 5-fold increase of developing delirium compared to people without. It can occur, that's a very big statistic up there, by the way, 22 to 89%, but the fact is that people over 65 are at a higher risk. It can persist for months, and sometimes it can actually be a precursor to having permanent cognitive changes, so we take it very seriously. 75% of delirium cases occur in people with dementia who already have a vulnerable brain. So if you notice with the person, your loved one, I say loved one because I don't have another term, but I know that not everybody here is looking after people who they love. Sometimes they're looking after people that they like quite a lot who have nobody else, but I'm just going to use the expression loved one. So it's basically about if there is a sudden change in that person, then we really do have to pay very good attention to that, and we need to get medical attention. It's about getting to the GP, okay? Or even up to the hospital if they're really off, because it means there's something else going on. And you guys are the ones that pick the change much quicker than anybody else because you see it, because you know what their normal behavior is like. So I think I should leave it there, shouldn't I? If I'm bang on time at the 10:35, because I have got more to go through, and then we'll get on to the behaviour stuff. Is that okay? Okay.
Thank you, Sharon. What a great start. Yep. There's a lot to consume there. So there's material down the back that will remind you of what's been said. Let me introduce Paul Thompson, and he's giving us a carer's perspective. Welcome.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you for inviting me to speak at this forum. Good morning to everybody. When asked if I would like to take part in this forum, I considered what aspect of dementia I would talk about. As it's Carers Week, I thought I would give you an insight into my caring role for my wife and the importance of support for carers, and how my family and I made it a labour of love. Now, I'm not qualified to give you advice, but I can give you the benefit of my experience, and my experience is still ongoing. Firstly, a little bit of background. I'm a retired precision engineer. My wife is a retired office administrator, and until 10 years ago, a teacher of patchwork and quilting. We're both 82 and have been married for 60 years. We have 3 wonderful, supportive daughters. Gwen was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 10 years ago. I cared for Gwen at home up until 3 months ago, when, on advice of health professionals, I reluctantly placed her in an aged care facility as a permanent resident. When Gwen was first diagnosed, her illness was not obvious, and many of our friends were in disbelief. As the months went by, I found that Gwen's ability to do normal, everyday tasks had become a challenge. I had no knowledge on how to care, so I decided to seek guidance and was directed by a counsellor from New South Wales Health to join a male carer support group, of which I attend still to this today. Now, this was an important first step, as it opened other doors for assistance. I might add that there are similar female carer support groups. Now, I'm a man of the 1940s, and I could possibly be regarded as conservative. So joining a support group was a reluctant step for me. However, family pressure and the persistent invitation by the leader of the group made me take the first step. I decided to cautiously approach the venue, and if I discovered that they were sitting in a circle holding hands, then I was going to be out of there. However, fortunately, that wasn't the case. It was coffee and biscuits and slaps on the back by a group of men that have my unending admiration. The meetings generally consisted of an update on each person's circumstances and how each were coping, followed by advice and solutions to the problems by the leader. Various health professionals that were specialists in the field of dementia were invited to visit for information sessions, along with counsellors from aged care organisations, both government and private. The leader of this group is a psychologist employed by New South Wales Health. This person put me in touch with Dementia Australia, who in turn invited me to information seminars on how to live with and care for a loved one with dementia. Meanwhile, at home, I suddenly took on the role of chief cook. Whilst cooking wasn't a mystery to me, I was limited to cooking steak on the barbie. Dementia Australia directed me to cooking classes. I spent half a day each month for 12 months being taught the basics on how to cook nutritious meals. New South Wales Health supplied the kitchen, the cooking instructor and the ingredients for the princely sum of $5 a class. There was no room for mistakes because you had to eat what you ate, what you cooked. Finally, there are support organisations throughout the metropolitan area that specialise in making the journey easier: dementia cafes, art and craft sessions, exercise to music, and organisations such as your own round the table, which I might add Gwen enjoyed the most. We were told it is important to be socially active, to engage in as many stimulating activities as possible, and this is what we did. Too many to mention here, and I sincerely believe it made a difference. However, I had to seek them out and be proactive, and as devastating as the prognosis was, I was determined to achieve the best outcome, and so can you. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I do note I didn't see any photos of me in that presentation. Okay, time for a short break. We're going to have coffee and tea. So it'll be 10 minutes, and when you hear the music stop, that's when it's time to come back, and I will do a reminder. So for the online guests, come back when the music stops, and there's some food on the tables, and the servery there's some tea and coffee. But before we just jump, just mention the resource tables. They're highly recommended books up there to purchase. There's some information sheets from Dementia Australia. Dementia Australia does have an awesome website, so that's there as well, if you can't find exactly what you're after. And also, when you go to the Dementia Australia website and they give you guidance and advice, they talk about things that can help in your journey. And there's another table there that's home life products. Have a look at them. It's kind of like when I looked at it earlier, I went, hey, that's just like what Dementia Australia said. So there's some good products there. So anyway, we'll break now and see you on the other side. If I can start calling you back to your seats, we'll start in about a minute. Thank you.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, we're just starting now, so our next session is with Carol Maureen.
Oh, yes. You're on that microphone, and you'll hear when it's working. Yes, it's on. It goes just... Welcome back from morning tea, everybody. And Maureen, I know you've been involved with people living with dementia for a long, long time. And I just want to ask you one question. How do you think that people with faith cope with living with dementia?
It's really quite a hard question, but dementia doesn't discriminate. So some people of faith will also be diagnosed with dementia. And faith can make a difference to a person. We just need to find ways to help them remember that faith. And we might have to do this several times over and over again. But music is a powerful trigger for memory recall. So music and hymns that they would have been familiar with help them to reconnect with their faith. It brings back memories, and it also encourages conversation. And even when they lose the ability to read, a lot of them will still be able to remember the words of hymns and choruses. My experience when I worked with a group of people with dementia was one day at a devotional meeting. I said to the group, Jesus, you are special to Jesus and he loves you. And so spontaneously a lady from the group replied, Jesus loves me, this I know. And then she started to sing the rest of the chorus, and the others just joined in too. We observed at the end of the meetings, and we used to evaluate the meetings from time to time, that the people in the group were less agitated, were happier, were calmer. So music did make a big difference to them, and then helping them to recall their faith. And we can help people to remember their faith and nurture it by reading verses from the Bible, just short, simple prayers, singing hymns, and even sometimes using visual aids like perhaps a cross or symbols of Holy Communion, things that they were familiar with. But most importantly, and above all, we can reassure and comfort them that, and remind them that nothing can separate them from God's love. And that's so comforting and reassuring for them.
Thank you, Maureen. Appreciate that. You know, research has shown that faith does make a difference to people with dementia. And Susie couldn't be here today, but here's a video of her speaking at that too.
Hello everybody, let me introduce myself. My name is Susie Glennon and my mum, June, has dementia. I was asked a question, do you think June's faith is still a comfort to her, even though she has dementia? Well, I have to say yes, it does. Even though she doesn't remember my name or who I am, when I read her the Psalms from the Bible, or we pray, or we sing a hymn together, she knows the words and she acknowledges the goodness of God. God Almighty, early in the morning, our hearts will rise to sing. Holy, 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 mercifully Almighty, God in three persons, blessed Trinity. It's beautiful. Your turn.
Thank you, ladies. Now we're going to move to Sharon's second part of her talk.
Thank you. I found Paul's talk wonderful. A really lovely insight into being a carer. And I thought that was sensational. And the thing about music is absolutely so true, but wasn't she delightful? That was very, very endearing to watch. So ploughing on quickly through the rest of these comorbidities, just something to watch out for and be aware of. Falls are a big thing. Falls are a big thing, and this is why we talked about the glary surfaces and the floors and rugs and all of that kind of thing. It's quite extraordinary that people with older people with dementia are probably there's a 70 to 80% chance of them falling, which is twice that of the normal older adult population. And they're more likely to get a fracture, and I think part of that is down to not supporting or recovering in any way when they do fall. And there are changes in the way that they walk. They can end up with a narrow gait, they can be shuffly. There's a whole different way that the brain, look at this is the engine room up here, and the brain is actually operating everything. So if we've got problems with this, then everything else is going to be a problem as well. Sound? Okay. I don't know how to do it. Have I done something in here, or is it just the microphone?
Yeah, the mic's fallen. Sorry.
That's all right. Well, that is better, isn't it? I don't want to lull you off to sleep. I mean, that's the last thing I want to be doing. So also the other thing that happens with people when they have dementia is they get given drugs, and drugs can often be a trigger for people falling over. And lastly, blood pressure drop. That can be quite common in people, older people with dementia too, because everything's been operated from up here. So if somebody is sitting or lying and then they get up into a standing position and the blood pressure doesn't get up with them, they're more likely to fall. I think the other problem is is the not being able to recover when the stumble happens, not being able to make that recovery quickly enough, because there isn't that ability in the brain to recognize that fall and to actually adjust for it. And we're back to that trim on the top of the staircase, you know. I would have been able to save myself if my foot had caught it. I did have a little clip there for you, but we can't show it the technological side if it isn't going to work. But it was just to show you how easy it is, even with somebody with a frame, when they go to turn around, how easy they can go over backwards, how people go to sit down on a usually a walker or something, and it's not, the brakes aren't on, and off that goes. Walking around a corner too fast, and you know, the head's way ahead of the feet, and the feet just don't get a chance to follow. So you know, it's those are the sorts of things that are actually quite common. So when I talk about impaired executive function and motor planning skills, it's all, you know, jargon speak, but it is that. It's about being able to adjust for, it's about being able to prepare for any move that you're about to make, and being able to react or respond if it doesn't work quite to plan. The reduced attention span is something, and I'm sure a lot of you will have seen this with people living with dementia, that they can lose focus quite quickly and not be paying attention to what they're doing. Impaired visuospatial skills, not being able to see the way they used to be able to see. So I talked to you about a man who I saw in the clinical trials at Hornsby Hospital, who used to run. And he said that he came back, it was a year later, and I said, "Are you going to be doing the City to Surf again this year?" And he's like, "No, I can't do that." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, I can't see people coming up the sides anymore. And I'm afraid that I'm going to run into someone's pathway and cause an almighty pile up." So I know you're all sitting close to each other, so those that you can do this, do it. Those who can't, just watch the other people who are doing it. But basically, if you put your hands out, anybody who can, to the sides like this, and you wiggle your fingers, and you bring your hands in until you can see your fingers moving, there's your peripheral vision. And you can kind of look up and you can look down. Now bring your hands all the way into here, and now make yourself a bit of a ball, and that's kind of what you can be left with. It can get even smaller till you end up looking like this. So you can see how someone coming up at the side, how this sort of stuff can promote falling. You can see how you haven't noticed that, because you've actually got to consciously look. This affects a lot of things. It doesn't mean that the eyes are there's actually something wrong with the eyes. It's the fact that the brain is not operating properly to use the eyes correctly. So if they were to actually sit down and go through an eye test, chances are they'd still be able to see, but you'll find that the fields of vision have disappeared at the sides. This makes a difference if you're giving somebody a hot drink as well. Makes a difference if you're giving somebody some food and you just slid it across the table under them and they haven't seen it. Impaired visuospatial skills are quite a big thing. Also, when they're walking, we're back to the glary surfaces. When you're walking, if you see a sudden change in the floor, if it goes from a lighter floor to a darker floor, there can be a real sense of, I'm about to step into a deep, dark hole. Not being able to have that perception, depth of vision is all gone. So that sense of, you'll find people will want to walk around things. And it's all down to how they're actually seeing the world. So that's a big thing. Unrealistic perception of motor abilities and balance. I think I can do more than I really can. And you'll have to forgive me because I am a nurse, and nurses do have a sort of a black humour, almost a bit of a gallows humour. It helps you get through. So I was in the emergency department at Hornsby Hospital, and I'm still smiling, and it's really not funny, I'm so sorry, but there's a tiny bit of it that is. And so this family come in with this lovely little old lady, and they'd taken her up to up to the ARV at Castle Hill. And they were showing her one of the areas there for her to be considering to move in, to actually go and live there. And so they went around the whole place, they came out into the car park, and she said, you know, I don't think I need any of that. She said, I can still do a handstand. So you can just picture what she came in with, can't you? 2 broken wrists and a black eye. So, you know, that really is a thing. That's so believing you can do something you just can't do. I mean, a lot of people have that, but it's much worse when you have dementia. Impulsivity. It's up there as impulsivity, but really it's more that there's zero recognition of what I'm about to do. There's no thought process around what I'm about to do. So again, my granddad. So we had an attic, and he'd gone up into the attic to look for something at my behest, which was really made me feel very guilty. I'd wanted to find something. He insisted he would go up and find it. You know, it's my granddad. I'm not going to argue with him. So he goes up into the attic, and while he's up there, I'm looking up and I'm thinking, is that a wasp? A wasp in the UK are big yellow black things, and their stings really hurt. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, there's another one. So I kind of went up and had a little bit of a look, and I said, Grandy, you have to get down, there's wasps. And I came back down because I'm smart. So I came back down and I'm seeing them. And then we'd obviously disturbed the nest up there, right? So he is stood, there's the hole down into the garage. He is stood on the edge of this hole now, like could have just turned around and come back down. He's going to catch them all. I mean, it's not a smart thing to catch a wasp at the best of times, but standing over a drop like that, I nearly had conniptions. So that complete risk-taking behaviour, impulsivity thing, first time and only time in my life I actually yelled at my granddad, Grandy, get down, you're going to fall. And something in my tone, because I never raised my voice to my grandparents or my parents, must have really triggered, because he came back down. Just so you know the end of this story, he was fine, but I got a really nasty sting on the back of my knee from one of those wasps, which I'm sure was in payment for shouting at him. But anyway, there you go. So there is all of that. It's a very big thing with falls. So ask the GP to review any medications. Just have a quick run through. Is there anything we can take off that we don't need? If there is a low blood pressure issue, that needs to be addressed. Going to the ophthalmologist, especially when people are able to still engage in assessments, and making sure that the visual aids they do have in place are still appropriate. What I haven't put up there is change from bifocals to single lenses. Bifocals are really tricky because when you're looking down, you don't really see very well. So when I go into people's homes, like, are they bifocals? Yes, they are. How much reading are you actually doing now? Yeah, not that much. Get single lens glasses. And anything to do with exercise and balance training is always going to be beneficial. Build up the muscle strength that allows you to react perhaps a little bit better. And consider an occupational therapist just to check out the home for any hazards you might not have already picked up. This is all to help with falls. Weight loss and nutritional disorders. So this was really picked up really early by Alois Alzheimer when he did his first patient, was the fact that there was a weight loss issue. Now, I'm just going to paraphrase all this really quickly, because the main issue that people have when they're looking after someone with dementia is to come up to the memory clinic and be very distraught that their loved one was losing weight. And it wasn't for the want of all the effort that that person was putting in to make sure that they ate well. So even if they're eating really well, and that may drop off anyway, there's something about the dysregulation of the energy balance. Again, we've got an engine up here that's misfiring. And it's actually very common for people to lose up to 10% of their body weight, even when they're eating well. My granddie was eating well. but he was losing weight. We made a few changes, added a few things in, and he regained some of that weight. So it's quite common. So there are things that we just have to be aware of, things that we can do. There are supplements that people can have, but you don't give them at meal times. If you give them at meal times, it fills them up. So you give them at morning tea and afternoon tea. Finger foods are a good thing. Put out stuff for grazing. So finger foods, anything you can pick up. Cheese, crackers, hard-boiled eggs, anything that's just that they can graze on. Fruit, another good one. Any favourite foods. The time to worry about whether they should or shouldn't be having a certain thing. If they love ice cream and they want that every day, then it's ice cream every day. I mean, it's actually quite good for you if you take the fat content out of it. But when you're looking at people like this, you just have it, you know. Making it a pleasurable occasion, the background music, exercise to promote a little bit of hunger, and also making sure they drink plenty so they don't dehydrate. Did everybody know that that's a thing that happens, that people lose weight even when they're eating well? It's odd, isn't it? Did everybody know about the epilepsy? Yeah, I must admit I was pretty surprised by that when I found that, the epilepsy one. Incontinence, I imagine a number of you in the room will have had some experience of this with somebody who's living with dementia. It's the inability to respond appropriately to the signals about the bladder or bowel being full. So there are various reasons for this. There are age-related changes anyway. For men, it's the prostate gland, and for women, it's the... lost my words. Anyway, particularly if you've had children, you know what I'm getting at. So the other things that happen, particularly as well with people with dementia, is the sensation of a full bladder doesn't really register. So that's one thing. Not having that inhibition about where you should or shouldn't be passing urine, that kind of can go. Also being able to plan how to go to the toilet, that can go. And being able to manage the clothing as well, that can go. So there are lots of things starting to back up against somebody so that they end up with this issue with incontinence. Not everybody does, by the way. So there's a threefold likelihood of getting some kind of incontinence with dementia. It does occur earlier in vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, and frontotemporal dementia than it does in Alzheimer's. It happens later in Alzheimer's. And fecal incontinence can also occur in about 2 to 5% of people, but higher for those with dementia. Always treat any reversible causes. Sometimes it can be infection that causes people to get incontinent. I would definitely go down the road of prompting to go to the toilet every 2 or 3 hours, because that can really help. Pelvic floor exercise, thank you, pelvic floor. Pelvic floor weakness for women, it's coming back to me. Pelvic floor exercises where possible. I've got to say, that's going to be really hit and miss. Even people who are cognitively really well don't do that particularly well. Reviewing medications with the GP, because they can be making a difference. And really, catheterization is something we want to avoid at all costs, but it is used under particular circumstances. So it's not something we're going to go for in terms of managing incontinence. Sleep disturbance is another thing. There may be people in the room who might have noticed this change as well with people who have dementia. There are age-related changes in sleep patterns for older people anyway, for older adults. But when you start looking at dementia and Alzheimer's particularly, the sleep efficiency, how effective the sleep is, starts to be quite affected. So they're more likely to take more time to fall asleep, more likely to wake up more, have more daytime sleeping, and they spend more time in the lighter stages of sleep instead of the lovely restorative deep sleep. So up to 50% of people with dementia or their carers report sleep disturbances. What we did notice with the memory clinic is that the carer would come in and say, up all night, can't get them to settle, waking me up 3 or 4 times, tra-la-la, tra-la-la. And then the person living with dementia comes in and says, how well do you sleep? Like a log. Sleep really well, no problem with my sleeping. I'm a very good sleeper. So, there's that real disconnect. The circadian rhythm, how we actually, our day-night cycle, everything's regulated up here. So if this is all going a bit haywire, then everything else is changed too. So the body clock gets affected. And they just tend to do this whole switching, people kind of like sleeping more in the day and staying up at night or being awake at night. It's really hard. The two things that are most likely to get people over the line into an aged care facility, I think, from what my experience is, carers who don't get their sleep and trying to manage incontinence, particularly if it's double incontinence, they're the ones that, because people need to be able to sleep, As the dementia worsens, so does the sleep disturbance worsens as well, unfortunately. And the only other thing I can say is that sleep apnea may occur more often in people with dementia, but there is also the flip side to that the sleep apnea might be giving those symptoms of dementia that can then be reversed if they correct the sleep apnea. Don't hang too many hopes on that though. So that's your sleep disturbance. We recommend good exposure to bright light through the day, keep the blinds up. The number of houses I go into, and it's like walking into a cave, and I think, gosh, get the light in. Keep the room dark at night. So the body needs to be sort of recognized that we're supposed to be going to sleep. And so you just need wayfinding the toilet, but the bedroom needs to be dark. We can't have all that lit up, and then during the day it's all dark. It all gets very confusing. We need to keep it as clear as possible. Any exercise that happens through the day is going to be helpful, particularly in the afternoon, I would say. Try and avoid any caffeine after 2:30. Try and limit the daytime napping. That is very hard to do. Anybody who keeps wanting to drop off to sleep and someone keeps waking them back up again, it never really ends well, does it? Let's be honest about that. But the problem with the half of the reason I think with the daytime napping is that dementia is fatiguing. It is so exhausting trying to keep track of everything all day long and understanding your situation and the environment and everything that's going on all day. By the time you get to the sort of early to mid-afternoon, they're usually wiped. A short rest is okay. It's when they're sleeping for hours through the day that we want to try and reduce that a bit. Try not to use sedatives. Melatonin is the one that everybody is now getting from the GPs, and the geriatricians are all now suggesting melatonin. So melatonin is something your body already produces in preparation to going to sleep. So when everything's not working properly up there, you give melatonin to the person, and that helps the body to recognize it's time to go to sleep. Also very useful for jet lag, if you're going across various time zones, by the way. I'm sure some of you have already figured that one out for yourselves too. And a couple more to go, guys. Visual disturbance. I won't go into great detail with this one because we have talked a little bit about that already. What I would say, though, is being able to see clearly is affected. Understanding what they're seeing is affected. But where it makes a difference is problems with getting dressed, misreaching for objects that they think is closer or further away than it is, toppling out of the chair because they think the glass is here, but it's actually there, that kind of depth perception, bumping into things, especially going around corners and stuff like that, misjudging steps, uneven surfaces, not being able to recognize that change, difficulty with reading and writing. And I've sat down with people and said, can you tell me about, can you read? And those, even quite a long way along, when I've really dug into it, have been able to tell me that the words just kind of start to drop off. And we had somebody who said it's like reading a line, and then when you get to the end of the line, all the words just go down there. So reading becomes quite an issue. That's why you find they'll have the paper there, but they're not really reading it a lot of the time. Blurred and distorted vision, losing their way in a familiar environment because everything's starting to look a little bit different, and also falling. So it's a big deal with the effect that it has on vision. I try not to come up behind somebody who's got dementia. I always try and approach from the front. They can't see. Nothing worse than sitting there. Someone's got hands suddenly planted on their shoulders if they don't see that person coming. So it's all that kind of thing, really. Recommend that we just try and make the environment a little bit friendly. So we've got high contrasting markers, different coloured toilet seat. If you're let's say if you've got a plate of food, that if you've got a nice colourful plate and you've got colourful food on it, they might not be able to see the food from the plate. So it's just about that distinction of colour and light and dark so that they can see things a little bit easier. It is worth going to the ophthalmologist and just getting the eyes checked anyway, and stuff like cataracts can still be fixed up early in the process. And again, back to the bifocals too. That is a quick and easy fix, the bifocals. Oral disease. So this is interesting too. People with dementia are likely to have fewer natural teeth, increased plaque accumulation and dry mouth. People with dementia will think they've cleaned their teeth when they haven't. And it's something that tends to disappear in terms of the personal care. And it can, the problems with the teeth can actually precede even getting the diagnosis of dementia. I did have a clip up there for that too, but I also can't show you, but it's helping somebody to clean their teeth. So I say to people, look, motor memory will often take over. If someone isn't going to go and clean their teeth, give them the toothbrush with the toothpaste on while they're sitting down having the shower, and just direct them. You might find it just happens naturally, but failing that, think about things like mouthwash. Mouthwash will reduce the bacterial load at least in the mouth, even if they're not going to be cleaning their teeth very well. But I would say that early in the diagnosis, that's when you need to get to the dentist, get anything that needs to be fixed up, any teeth that need to come out, any fillings that need to go in, get all that done while they're still able to do that as much as you possibly can. So oral disease can show itself. You may not be looking in someone's mouth. It's not something we do routinely, is it really? I mean, nurses and health professionals might, but we just don't do that with our family members and friends. So if don't want to eat and drink, if they're restless and agitated at meal times, if they're drooling and spitting, bleeding, anything like that, not wanting anything in the mouth at all, not wanting to put their dentures in, or if they've got really bad breath. I was on the ward with one lady who just, every time they gave her orange juice, she couldn't tell us what her needs were. So she just used to spit it out onto the table. Well, you can imagine that didn't go down very well with a lot of people. But I couldn't figure out how she would have yogurt, but she wouldn't have orange juice. So we got the speech pathologist to come and see her, and she had thrush all through the mouth and no way of telling anybody about it. So it's that kind of thing, really. It's just stuff to be aware of. Hope I'm not frightening everyone. We do always want to try and do the twice daily brushing or a mouthwash, if at all possible, and get the dentist to see them. And just get the GP to look at their medications, because some medications can really lead to a very dry mouth as well. Frailty. Last one, guys. This has now been sort of pathologized into a condition. Frailty is defined as weight loss, low grip strength, self-reported exhaustion, slow walking speed, low physical activity. All of them, not just one. So the evidence shows that decreases in strength and walking speed actually predate the onset of Alzheimer's by some years, as does weight loss as well. There are more cases of dementia in frail older people than in non-frail older people, so there's a definite link there. It's more common in women. It does increase with age. And studies indicate that people who have a cognitive impairment and a slow walking speed were 5 times more likely to develop dementia. So cognitive impairment is where you've got a few changes going on, but it hasn't moved any further than that. and then it can actually turn into a full-blown dementia. What can we do about that? So anything to do with exercise and walking is going to help. And also making sure that their nutritional requirements are met. That's another big thing. And any psychological factors that might interfere with them eating and drinking or doing their exercise. So you can actually reverse frailty. You can actually make somebody better by doing some regular exercise and so on and so forth. They were doing something, doing the study with frailty out in the community, and the physios had seen this lady who literally could not get up from an armchair without a huge struggle. And they showed her on the video camera really struggling to get out of this couch. And then after 6 weeks of doing the exercises and engaging and doing all the things that she needed to do, they then videoed her at the end and she was able to stand up without even touching the couch. And we had a similar situation ourselves recently with Sydney Home Nursing Service, where we had, we just do like a little 4-week thing for people who don't want to go out of the home, and they just do these things in the home. They're supported by the nurse. And it was quite funny. I said, well, are you able to say, oh, I can't do standing up. I can't stand up, she said, without pushing down on something to stand up. I said, so you can't just stand up? She said, I can't do that. Don't worry about that, she said. Nobody can help me with that one. I can't do that one. I thought, that's okay. We'll stick it in there as a, stretch goal. Maybe we won't worry about it at all, but we'll do all the other stuff that needs to happen. And when I came back at the end of the 4 weeks, because I just wanted to see how things had gone, and she was doing this walking, and she'd done really well. And I said to her, she's like, oh, hold on, I haven't finished yet. I've got something else to show you. And so she sat down on this bench. She put her hands on her knees, and she stood up without actually pressing. She said, I can't do it without pressing on my knees yet, but she was actually able to stand. So you can actually do something to reduce some of those indications for frailty. That was it in terms of the comorbidities of dementia. Where do I finish up? Am I finishing up now, or are we?
No, we're doing a Q&A after the next session.
Okay, all right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for that. That frailty was news to me, so but I've seen it in my mother's situation, where the care facility pretty much made her walk with chairs, 2 people holding her, and her health just improved. Her mental health improved, so that the exercise really does have that impact to their brains. Before we go to the next session, Peter, could I just ask you to put the slide we had on for the coffee and tea break? And no, not this one, the one we had for the coffee and tea. It's the single slide from Tim. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Okay. For the folks who are joining us online, haven't been able to get to see any of the resources and see what's available there. So I just wanted to point out that if you're interested in hearing or seeing some of those books, or the link for the Home Life products, that slide there, if you could just note down the office at tbc.org.au, and then you can email the reception here at church, and they will put you in touch with the right links or information, so you don't miss out on that just because you're online. Okay, so I'm going to now move into the next session, so thanks, Pete. So I'm going to talk about around the table, and we're going to go through some slides that will go through the background while I talk underneath that. And those slides will continue after I finish, so there will be a bit of silence after that. Don't worry, that's planned. So Anyway, so if we can start presenting those memories, I call them memories of around the table. As we kind of like heard from today, I think a couple of times, dementia is a disease that is not a respecter of persons. It impacts all genders, races, geographies, strata, except to say it's probably more prevalent in the aged demographic. And we found it impacted our community. And where individuals and families would drop out of fellowship, and with a bit of digging, it became apparent that the dementia was causing and impacting our church members' lives, is making them homebound, and the whole family was impacted, and stifling fellowship and social activities, which, as we've heard, fellowship and social activities are so important. So it was at this point that Carol started the dementia ministry, and amongst other things, she collected a group of people, the lovely group in red t-shirts, and they host this Dementia Forum, and also the support group that we have. It's called Around the Table. It's called Around the Table because it invokes a memory of how households used to assemble at the end of the day around the kitchen table or the dining room table, and they talk about their day and they'd share stories and the day's activities and news. So we run that fortnightly. It's on the second and the fourth Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. and it's in one of the houses that we have on the property. So the activities include memory books, music, there's some singing, and other activities that the loved ones that live with dementia are more likely to enjoy. It also gives carers the opportunity to speak to someone, to ask questions, get ideas for help, or just step away and take some respite. Both living with dementia, those living with dementia and their carers are all welcome. So if that's of interest, could I ask you to grab one of the team members in the red t-shirts, and they've got a little card, and just put your names and details, and actually you can write down how can we help, what type of things we can help you with. And if you could give that back to the team member or just take it back to the resources table, they will be able to follow up and contact you and help you in whatever you need. So we're just going to continue. Have we gone around once before or no? I'll just keep watching. Now we're going to into the last session for Sharon to have a Q&A time. So we're going to ask you, if you have any questions, just raise your hand, and a helper will come around and give you a microphone, and then start asking the question when the microphone is there. Otherwise, the people online won't be able to hear. So Sharon, do you want to come up?
Thank you. I do still have a few more slides because this is the bit around the behaviour stuff. So I'm going to encourage you to ask questions as we go, but if I can have the slides back up, that would be really good. One of the big issues that we have when somebody has dementia is the need almost to change our communication style. And that's really hard if you've been with somebody for a very long time and you have all those default roles and default ways of speaking. And it's something that causes a lot of friction at home, and I'll explain why. But this kind of, I'm not sure if I should laugh at confusing conversation or remain quiet. And you will start to see somebody with dementia in large social groups getting more and more withdrawn and saying less and less. So the problem with this whole thing is that the brain can't keep track of all of those conversations. And I would talk to somebody, talk to them, well, I don't like the social gathering so much anymore. He said, by the time I've actually formulated an answer to something that they've said, the conversation has moved on. It's just too difficult to do. So we do have to be very aware of that. Behaviours that people see, behaviours are an unmet need. So when people can no longer actually tell you what the problem is, they will start to behave in a different way. And it's a way of we have to start interpreting that. So having dementia itself can be a very frightening experience. You're the only one going through that. Sometimes there will be days when you don't really understand what's happening around you. And so what we tend to do as human beings is when we start to lose our ability to process intellectually, we start to work off the gut. Everything becomes an emotional response. And any of us, if we were deprived of yesterday and had no ability to plan for tomorrow and didn't really know what was just going on then, are going to react in a similar sort of way. So if that person starts to get very agitated or upset, we do have to think, is there something else going on here that we need to be addressing? Have they got pain? Are they uncomfortable? Are they, do we have a full bladder? Have they got constipation? Because we'll see things that will trigger behaviours, and they're not always going to be able to tell us why. The other thing is sundowning. Has everybody heard this expression of sundowning? So sundowning is when, as the day wears on, that person will get more and more restless and a little bit agitated and a little bit not very happy. And I would just put it to you that we all sundown. We all sundown. It's just that we get to do something with that feeling at the end of the day. It's a natural response to the rhythm of the day. For as long as we can remember, we get up when it's light, we have a pattern to the day. As the evening comes around, we have a change of pace. We're doing something different. Even if you're a shift worker, your day will be set up in a certain way. But we know that there's things to do. And somebody who has dementia doesn't always know what to do with that feeling of this. Well, I should be going somewhere now. I should be doing something. There's something I should be doing. So because I've always picked the kids up, or because I've left work at this time, because I've started to make dinner, I've started preparing dinner for the evening, we're starting to wind down. So that's a behaviour that we will see, and it's something that a lot of people do actually have to manage. Being a carer is a tough gig, I have to say. So I talked before about the emotional equilibrium, and this is what I'm talking about. Because we can't rely on the intellect to make sense of, process, plan, and all of the rest of it, we're really having to appeal to keeping the emotional equilibrium. Having said that, some things that are emotionally important will be retained. It's quite amazing how you can go all day having told somebody the same thing over and over again, but they will always remember where those car keys are. because they want to go out and drive. Or if you're on the ward and the nurses say, I want to go home. Nurses say, the bus will be here at 4 o'clock. I think I've done a lot to stop that at Hornsby before I left. And so 3:30, they all go off at the end of their shift. 4 o'clock comes around, they're waiting for that bus, because that was the bit that mattered most out of the whole day. So we do have to be very careful about telling therapeutic lies, because they'll catch you out and they'll remember you've done it. It's very strange the way the brain works. So what we really have to do when we're talking with our loved ones with dementia is we have to validate that they've been heard. So what happens is I'm worried about something and you tell me why I don't need to be worried about it, because that's what we all do, right? I've got a problem and that's okay, I've got the solution, but this doesn't work with someone with dementia. I've got a problem, I've got the solution, but that just means you haven't really heard me. You're not doing anything to make me feel better about the problem, and I can't retain the solution. So what we do is we validate and we support that person and we show the empathy and reassurance, and we may then use some kind of activity, a circuit breaker or a distraction to get them off topic. An example might be, the one that comes up a lot actually in the community is, this person is responsible for me not being able to drive anymore. So I'm angry with you because somehow in amongst all of this, I'm pretty sure it was you that made sure I couldn't drive anymore. So they say, I don't understand why, there's no reason why I can't drive. I'm a good driver, I can drive. Who says I can't drive? Tell me, why can't I drive? And the person then starts to explain why you can't drive. Well, it's going to fall, it's like throwing seeds on stony ground. It's not going to register, only now I know you're not on my side either because you agree with everybody else. So a lot of what we end up doing is we end up being on that, the one person they want on their side is you. You know, whatever everyone else throws at me, this person's got my back. So you just end up agreeing with everything, because if you're agreeing with somebody, they've got nothing to fight back against. So you might say something like, oh, the driver, I know, I understand, I agree. You might go a step further and say, it's really awful that this has happened to you. You know, I understand where you're coming from. I wouldn't like it either. So now we're not putting forward the reasons why. Now we're not trying to explain something to that person. Now we're just telling them, you know what? This is a crappy situation and I wouldn't like it either, but I'm here with you and we're going to work through it together. We have nurses on the ward. Again, we're back to this whole, I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home. Well, we all do want to go home, so we can all understand that, right? And it would be, oh, you can't go home because the doctor says, tra-la-la, 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 I don't care, because you're with them now. So you've told me I can't go home as well, and you're telling me why, and I'm not going to remember it. So I learned very quickly to say, oh, so do I. I want to go home, yes, so do I. It's usually true. By the time you've spent a couple of hours with somebody sundowning in the ward, you are ready to go home. So this is what we actually have to start doing. So we're not going to explain stuff. We're just going to be the person who's always on their side, and we're not going to give them anything to fight back with. You know, if I'm agreeing with you on everything, it's very hard for you to keep arguing with me until you get to the point where you can then use a circuit breaker and get them off the topic. Be prepared for it to come back round. Slow things down. Conversation is too fast. You need to slow things down. You need to keep it simple. It takes time to register all those words and work out what's been said and then formulate some kind of response. We can't speak at the same speed we did before. We're missing some of the words. We don't understand the context. Slow it down. And don't think, by the way, that if you're walking with somebody and you think, well, the carers are coming at 10, I've got to get it, and you walk in and then you ask them a question, what do? Stop dead. And the nurses used to catch this all the time. I've got to ask them a bunch of questions. I've also got to get them in the shower. So I'll ask the questions while I'm walking to the shower, and they just come to a dead stop in the middle of the ward, and you couldn't move any further until they'd managed to go. So the walking and talking is tricky. So try not to make them do too many things at once. Be aware of how tiring it is. It's exhausting having dementia. It's exhausting keeping track of everything. It's exhausting trying to think of the unanswered to everything people have given you through the day. The brain is working overtime trying to get across all those gaps in order to operate for a day. By the mid-afternoon, they're wiped. Don't use multiple choice. Can't do it. By the time you get to the third option, not only have I kind of lost the first option, but I'm also starting to lose track of what we're talking about in the first place. Now, I've told people this, but I was just explaining to one of the members here today that for a very brief period of time, the weirdest time ever, the aged care nurses and maternity nurses had to combine to work with one patient who was in her 30s with dementia who'd had a baby. It was all very planned and carefully considered and tra-la-la. It didn't all happen by accident. Well, getting pregnant happened by accident, but the rest of it was all, properly done. So what was happening on the ward is the aged care nurses were providing the one-on-one, one-to-one nursing with her. She was about 34. And then the maternity, the midwives and obstetrician were looking after the family, teaching them how to look after the baby. And she used to walk past the cot and go, "Oh, pretty baby," and keep on walking. It's very, very sad. But she brought it home to me, everything I've been teaching people about, don't give people multiple choice. And we were walking down the corridor, and I got seduced by the fact that she was young and funny. She had a wicked little sense of humour, and she was quite funny, And so I got seduced by the fact that she was so young. So we're walking down the corridor. I'll just give her a name. I'll say Rebecca. I say, "Rebecca," well, then we'll go and get a coffee. So, "Rebecca, what do you want to do? Do you want to sit in here and have the coffee, or do you want to take it back to the room?" And she went, I don't know what you were just asking me. I don't know what you just asked me. And I thought, I've done it. I've done exactly what I've told people not to do. I've given her a choice. She's lost track of what I'm talking about. She's probably forgotten what room is. And I said, "You know what? You're quite right. So let's just have a cup of coffee and take it back." She said, "Yeah, let's just do that." So we do have to be very careful, and because they will struggle with that. 3 types of sandwiches, that's always a killer. Okay, family gatherings and social occasions. I told you, we need the social input. The social stimulation, if you like, is also very emotionally supportive. But be very aware that large groups of people can result in overstimulation and withdrawal very quickly. So I say to people, look, if you're going to have a family gathering, and sometimes these family gatherings are a lot of people, don't do it in the restaurant, because we'd have people who go book out the restaurant, and they just want to leave. Have it at home so they can retreat and go to a quieter room, and everyone else can carry on, and then bring them back in. So you just have to start thinking about how you do things. They can't keep track of a conversation. Very exhausting. Agency and control involves them in the decision-making process. Giving them choices for something that has to happen, but make the choices both palatable for you. Another problem is around having a shower. Don't want to have a shower, just had a shower. Don't need a shower. Had a shower this morning. Well, that was 4 days ago. This is the trouble with this concertina of time. We've lost the past. We're only in the present. We're only living in the present. That's something to really take home. You're only living in the present. There's no planning for that, and there's no remembering this. So we're only in the present. So I was at somebody's house, and this was a woman who rushes everything, and they can't be rushed. Nobody with dementia can be rushed. Don't even bother trying. It's just too hard. And she was taking me through this, and I said, "Have you talked to him about when he would like to have a shower?" He had quite moderate to advanced dementia, but still walking around and functional to a degree. And she said, oh, well, we always have a shower. No, we always have a shower after dinner. That's what we do. We've always had a shower after dinner. I said, well, but he's not having it. She said, no, I can't get him to have the shower. And so he was sitting there, you know, a quiet observer is how I probably would describe him. And I said, when would you like to have your shower? Before your dinner or after your dinner? And he went, oh, before dinner. Get it out of the way. So she'd never thought to actually ask him that. And she was absolutely astonished at the response because she thought it was always going to be the way it always had been. So a little bit of control around decision making. I was talking to a lady the other day and he'd always been the decision maker and she was now having to make decisions. And I said, just include him. You know, you want to start emptying that leg bag into a bottle instead of making them get up and go to the bathroom to empty the leg bag. Just say to him, I've got this bottle. What do you think if I just do it here? Do you think that's a good idea? Now he's got the chance to say, yes, I think it is a good idea. Yeah, no, I don't think so. Okay, we'll leave that. We'll try it again another time. But you're giving that person a chance to be part of the decision making. But it's a decision you want to go a certain way. But you can't be doing the parent-child thing because it causes any amount of conflict. We're working off this, and I'm frustrated at the way you're speaking to me. I'm frustrated I'm being bossed around. I'm frustrated I'm being told I have to go and do this. What if I got this thing? Can't even work out. I don't even know why I have to do this thing. This is how it's happening. So we keep the emotional equilibrium and everything else will tend to fall into place. It's all very easy to say. We do have default dialogue and roles and everything that we have, but it's about choosing to do things in a different way. Above all, don't argue. It's really not worth it. And even people who really know this still find themselves explaining something to that person. So I was at a house I'm always at a house the other day. Have you noticed that? I'm always at a house the other day. Actually, always am at a house the other day. And it was a young carer. She was lovely. She was, I don't know, 30-something. And her mother had formed a very strong delusion that the ex-husband had been carrying on with the woman across the road. And even though she knew it wasn't going to stick, she still kept explaining to her mum that she'd got it wrong. And the mum said, well, you go and ask him. And in the end I said to her, do you know what? Let's just not do that. We just go, oh, yeah, that's pretty bad, isn't it? Move on. Let's not get stuck into an argument over any of it. I have now finished with that, but if anyone has any questions around behaviours that they've seen or things that they would just like to share or tips that they have, or anybody has something that they have had to face on occasions they don't understand why it's happening or they'd like to challenge me with a tip, please say.
Am I on? Yeah, thank you. Look, thank you for that. Thank you for the bit about communication. I just wanted to say and ask your comment on this. I have a friend who just before she went into residential care was completely delusional, paranoid and hallucinating quite badly, involving me because we had been neighbours elsewhere. And it was really difficult, to move her through that. And I just wanted your comment, if possible, on something with that kind of, there were all three things happening at the same time. And eventually, she did go into residential care quite quickly for respite and then permanently. But whether you have any particular comment on that kind of complicated scenario?
The problem is that when you can't make sense of anything that's going on around you, your brain is very quick to put in all the gaps, and they're usually wrong. So the delusions become quite ingrained, and they won't remember anything, but they'll get something stuck in there like an earworm. And if a delusion or a hallucination is very distressing to the person having it, it's really worth talking with a geriatrician or a GP, because there are medications that can be given to address those particular issues. There is no magic cure because it's the brain breaking down. And so you're basically looking at like you said, it's working through it, it's sidestepping the issue, it's trying not to feel so hurt when somebody says something to you, accuses you of something, or has a snap at you about something that they believe and you can't change their mind. It's about this is the disease process, this is not that person's personality. But when they are very frightened or upset by delusions or hallucinations, people are coming after me, I can see them in the bedroom and they are upset by it. That's when you go, look, we need to get medical intervention here because there are some tablets that can actually help to reduce that down, which is the right thing to do for them. That's all I've got. Anything else? Yes?
Thank you. Could you explain frontal lobe dementia to me, please?
Well, frontal lobe is just where the dementia has started. It's like I said to you before, wherever something starts, eventually, as you go along the process, a lot of all the same symptoms are going to happen. So the frontal lobe is where you've got a lot of that empathy, impulse control, personality. It's less about memory, actually, frontal lobe. It can become quite routine-driven stuff. The frontal lobe isn't fully formed until you're 25. There's a reason why your car insurance goes down after the age of 25. But, you know, it takes a long time to develop. It's the longest one. But those are the things that you will see. As it goes on, you will start to see more in the way of memory changes, etc. But with frontal lobe, you can do a memory test with someone with frontal lobe dementia, and they could actually do reasonably well, but they actually don't function very well. So they are the ones who they will have some personality changes. They can get stuck in routines. Rituals become very important. They will lose. There won't be much in the way of empathy there. All of that kind of stuff is, but eventually other things will all come into play as well. Is that helpful?
The reason for my question is that my husband has Alzheimer's, and in the mornings he has really, really bad frontal lobe headaches.
Oh.
And I haven't been able to get to the bottom of that.
I don't have an answer for you on that one. That's interesting. No, not necessarily. It may be dehydration. It may be medications he's taken. And we all get headaches if we're not drinking enough. I don't know. They're the first couple of things I'd be looking at. What's the GP say? Talk to the GP. Oh, okay. Yeah, some things aren't always explainable. Yeah, but that's the one I'd be going down the road of first.
Sharon?
Over there? This one? Sorry. Oh, sorry, I was following different hands.
My question relates to one of your last statements about agency and control.
Yeah.
How much can a demented person be coached in advance? I understand that it will depend on the degree, but you know, we're going to go to the GP tomorrow, or we're going to go to the dentist and he'll want you to open your mouth and he'll tickle you around in your gums or whatever.
That's a very good question. Preparing somebody for something, you can actually, you will know based on the reaction you get from that person whether this is a worthwhile thing to do. What you can end up in a situation is I've prepared you for the fact that we're going to the doctor tomorrow and we've had a conversation about it. And then tomorrow comes and they are no closer to remembering or understanding that. Only now I've got the frustration of the fact that I went all down that road with the SU and told you all about it. So you have to gauge that person. With some people, depending on how far along they are, they will remember things like that. And it is worth prompting them and just saying, we're going to the doctor tomorrow, but it's going to come down to the person. The big thing to know, I think, is that when the brain is damaged by dementia, depending on where it starts and all the rest of it, but being able to lay down new memory is one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's. You can't do it. So you can burrow back through and retrieve all those memories from the past. They've been well and truly laid down through the neural pathways when the brain was well. When the brain's not well, there's so much damage, you can't lay down any new stuff. So I can tell you, and you may very well understand in the moment completely, but you might not retain any of that till the following day. Your best bet with someone who really doesn't retain it is to, A, make all your appointments late morning at least if you can, because it takes a long time to get somebody with dementia ready because they've got this concertina of time, they've got no concept at all. And then you tell them that morning as they're getting ready, because you save yourself the conversation that doesn't land anywhere. And you're not really going to prepare them enough to make your next day any easier. That's probably what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a mother who's 90 in aged care, and many of those conditions she has many of those conditions that you've mentioned there. But she doesn't have a diagnosis of dementia, but there are many things that make me feel that that must be something that's happening. I just wonder at her stage whether having a diagnosis is something that I should pursue or not.
I don't think I would.
Thank you.
It's a good question, actually. I had this the other day with somebody. I don't think I would put somebody through all of that at that age. One of the reasons that you do the diagnosis thing is A, you want to know what's going on because there are all these changes, and B, maybe there may be some treatment that we could be starting that person on that pathway. Most geriatricians won't start somebody in their 90s on any of the Alzheimer's medications or any of that stuff. They just won't do it. In which case, it's a bit like that whole "a rose by any other name," you know, it smells just as sweet. You're just dealing with the symptoms. Is she already in a nursing home? Yeah. Yeah, so you kind of go, where is the benefit here? And most geriatricians would say, you don't need to see me. Yeah, it's kind of too late, which is good if it's come late, because that means she's had a long time without it. So.
Thank you, Sharon. My name is Paul. I was just wondering whether those slides on behavioral aspects which you shared, is that something you could share, which I can send it out to the family so that they are aware?
Truthfully, if you go onto the Dementia Australia website, you'll find a whole bunch of fact sheets around stuff like helping them with the shower and, you know, behaviours and all of that kind of thing. And those people are available at the end of the phone to ask that stuff off. But those websites have got so much information on them. That's where I'd be going.
This session is also on YouTube, and you can stream it later. So. Last one.
We hear that the earlier a diagnosis can be made, the greater are the chances that treatment can be effective. Is there research being done that will hold out the hope for earlier diagnosis, perhaps no DNA analysis and that sort of thing, that would hold out some hope about reversibility and that sort of thing?
So there have been so many global clinical trials about dementia. Everyone who comes up with the latest thing that they think is going to work, and then we do the clinical trials, and then sometimes you might get some traction, but as a general thing, we haven't found anything yet that will halt it in its tracks or reverse it. There are drugs out there that have been shown to have some efficacy about slowing the process down for a while. Would I go and get testing without a cure? You know, you do have to think, if you have the ability to reverse something or stop it, it's worth going and getting some kind of testing. Not everything's going to show up in genetic testing anyway, but the other thing is that there are markers, but it's interesting that those markers are no more of an indicator you're going to get dementia than the fact that you don't exercise and you don't have a healthy diet. They're almost on a par with that. Across the world, the numbers are rising, but the proportion of the population seems to be leveling, and that's because people are understanding there's a lot they can do not to get it. And the thing is with dementia is it's kind of started 20 years before you see the signs. So anything that you're doing to protect your heart is protecting your brain. So a heart-healthy diet, exercise, no smoking, little or no alcohol. Those things are going to be protective. The exercise is a good one. On top of that, they did a big nun study, so they worked all this out. You can Google the nun study. They also worked out that social networking, travel, and delaying retirement are also protective factors. So if you delay your retirement or you take up something else in retirement, that means you keep using your brain. If you travel, because you think about all the planning that's involved with that, if you keep up your social networks, think about all the stories you're trying to keep track of with your social networks. If you exercise, if you sleep well, if you eat well, Mediterranean, heart-healthy diet, all of those things are going to help you not to get dementia. But we don't have a pill yet, and I, for one, wouldn't go and get any kind of testing unless there was going to be a cure for it. That's just my... Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
And Sharon, before you leave, a token of our appreciation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's so lovely. Thank you, everybody. Been a very good audience.
You've shared your time and your experience and your wisdom, and you did it with a little bit of humour. And
gallows humour.
I was driving here going, oh, how could you crack a joke in a Dementia Forum? And you showed us how that there's humour in life. So.
No, absolutely. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's been quite the experience, I have to say, because I've never done anything quite like this before. So, and hats off to all the carers. It's a tough gig.
Yeah.
Really tough gig. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're at drawing to conclusion our forum. We'd like to thank everybody, but just a reminder, at the table at the back, there's resources and also the home life material. And for those who are joining us online, there is the email address, so you can grab that and ask any questions and ask for any of the information about the resources. And also, this is on YouTube, so you can look for the YouTube link, and that will you could replay all what's happened today. So. You just email the address that I showed you before, and yeah. Or what you could do is go to one of the carers, one of the team members, and fill in your details, and they'll email the link to you. Okay, that's probably the easiest way of doing that. So yeah, the contact cards, as mentioned there. If you have any other question, you can actually put any question down on those contact cards, and they'll follow up with you. So thank you so much. It's been lovely having to share that with you, and we hope to see you at the next forum. So thank you.